Hello again, everyone. This is a briefing on Assessment 3 for DP8. This assessment is called the Interiors Phase 2. It's worth 20% and it's due on day 2 of week 8. I'd ask that you read the course outline and the assessment description within this alongside watching this video. So what are we doing in Assessment 3? Well, we are zooming back into the interior spaces of your scheme. And what we're asking you to do is to refine the interior propositions that you've been developing over Assessment 1 and 2 and commit to these. We're asking that in this assessment, we really see a development of your interior propositions. So this is not the first time that you'll be doing it, and we'd like to see that you've been iterating, experimenting, and working on these interior spaces over the weeks since Assessment 2. In these interior spaces, we are expecting to see a greater level of control and of innovation. And for this, as we've talked about over the last assessments, we really need you to be clever and sophisticated in the way that you respond to intended programs, intended users, and the existing site. We are continuing with the 6 spaces that you selected in Assessment 1 and have developed into Assessment 2. And what we're asking for are 3 components within this assessment: a drawing set at 1 to 50, a storyboard including perspectives and a material palette, and a rip and tear model at either 1 to 50 or 1 to 20 and as a sectional model. The idea of these 3 modes of communication is that they give you different platforms in order to experiment with and express your design ideas. So rather than thinking about ticking the boxes of, okay, I have to do design development drawings, I need to do a material palette, and I need to do a model, think about the parts of your scheme which you might best communicate through drawing, the parts of your scheme which might be better communicated through supporting imagery of materials, and the parts that might really sing in a sectional kind of detailed model at 1 to 20 or 1 to 50. Remember that 2/3 of this assessment are a second go at what you've already established in Assessment 1 and 2. So the drawing set will be a development of the set that you have already been working on at 1 to 100, but shifting into 1 to 50. The storyboard will be a development of the black and white line drawings and mood imagery that you developed in Assessment 1 at a greater level of material detail, with also the incorporation of furniture, fixtures, and equipment. The new component, so 1/3 of the assessment, is the rip and tear model. And this is a means of getting you to practice working in 3-dimension before you have a second go at this in Assessment 4. Remember that there needs to be relationships between these 3 elements. So again, there'll be certain components of your scheme that really shine in rendered perspectives and others that much more clearly come through in plan or in section. So think about how these 3 communication modes work together and work individually to tell the story of different parts of your proposal. Again, think about these assessments as an opportunity to test and experiment before your final submission. Don't think about this assessment in isolation. Reflect on what you did in Assessment 1. What was the feedback that you got from your tutor, the feedback that you got from your peers, the general feedback comments that I gave online, and how have you incorporated those into Assessment 2? Follow that same reflective process in thinking about Assessment 2 and draw on this feedback and reflection in bringing together your work for Assessment 3. So let's go through the actual deliverables for the assessment. We'll first of all talk about the two parts of the assessment that are based on existing work that you've done in assessments 1 and 2. So first of all, the storyboard, and this is based on the Interiors Phase 1, Assessment 1. What is new within this component of the assessment? Well, you're still being asked to do 6 perspectives at A3 of your 6 key spaces. The additional component is that you'll now be showing materials, furniture, fittings, and artificial light in your perspective drawings. So those black and white drawings will start to come to life through these interior details. You will still have 6 A3 supporting panels, but the images on those panels will no longer be about a general atmosphere or mood or kind of generic precedents. It will be about selecting specific materials, specific pieces of furniture, specific fixtures and fittings that work within your proposal. So you might think of it more so as a palette, a material and FF&E palette. You're free to shift the format, so if you need more space, you can add additional A3s. You might choose to do 1 panel instead of 2 A3s. It's up to you to work out what is best going to work for your scheme. So a couple of questions that I jotted down from last year that arose. What if my key space has changed from the original 6 spaces that you developed in Assessment 1? That's fine, and I know that a number of students were in this situation last year. It just means that you'll have to change your perspective to reflect the new key space selection. Second question, do I need to show people? Yes, you do need to show people. I think that showing people is an important way of getting you to understand scale of space and anthropometrics. Also of you all thinking about the intended users of your space. So I'd be quite specific about which people you put into your images. So let's just go through some student examples. Here we have the storyboard from Kana Rumarol. So we can see on the left-hand side that her perspective now clearly shows natural and artificial light. We can see an array of materials and finishes. We can see furniture, and we can see people using the space in the background. Kana highlights existing structures versus new spaces, so you see the trust framework running through the space. And if we have a look at the storyboard images on the right, you can see that Kana has chosen specific materials and specific, in this case, lighting fixtures, and she has noted all of those. The reference plan is still there so that we understand where in your scheme we are looking. Zara Bates takes a very different aesthetic, much more expressive of her design intent, which I guess was a little less avant-garde in some ways than Kana's. So we see in her perspective that you can clearly see a cut through the existing rock formations of the site, proposed forms, particularly focusing on the ceiling. We see that there are different colours and textures and tones, artificial light, wall lights across the rock face, and you start to see some detail in the materiality of the floor plane and the joinery. This links directly, and it's quite clear in the relationship to the material palette, where again we have furniture specified and noted, materials and lighting specified and noted. Okay, so if we next move on to the drawing set, again, this should be a development of the drawing set that you submitted for Assessment 2. The big difference is that you're shifting from 1 to 100 to 1 to 50. What is the same is that we're still asking for black, white, grayscale. I know some people explored colour, which is also fine. Design development drawings. We are not asking for fully rendered plans and sections, and we are not asking for full sets of construction drawings or contract documentation. We are still asking you, and you did this well in assessment 2, to understand what your design intent is and how you might express this through the vehicle of kind of technical drawing conventions. So how might you manipulate line weight? How might you manipulate solid and mass in figure-ground relationships? How might you manipulate shading, tone, or hatching to describe the materiality of your scheme? The deliverables. So as per assessment 2, we're asking for one site plan at 1 to 500. This should be a cut of the ground floor plan, and you should be referencing your 6 key spaces on this plan. So circle them and reference them to the page that we see them in detail. We're shifting from 1 to 100, and we're now drawing at 1 to 50. This means that the same elements will be there as your 1 to 100 drawings, but you'll see these at greater detail. And this means that you really need to consider materiality and loose furniture. Fixed joinery should be there as it was in assessment 2. You'll have 12 1 to 50 sections. I will note that the assessment outline in the course outline says 10. That was an error. My apologies. It should be 12, so 2 per key space. The difference in the sections is that they are shifting from 1 to 100 to 1 to 50. And this means again that we need to see material and compositional junctions. So this might mean format, it could mean textures, it could mean how do those pieces of material start to connect to one another. So what are the joints? We need to see finished floor levels and finished ceiling levels, not just relative levels. We also need to see notional expressions of lighting where appropriate. So if it's significant lighting, if it's a significant lighting feature, it would come up in the section. All other information included in your assessment 2 submission should be included in assessment 3. What some students did is that their annotations were reduced in assessment 3. And they generated a system of finishes, joinery, and fixtures codes that related to a legend. You can use either annotations or a legend system or both. So some student examples. This is Kate Riley. So she started to use black and white plus blue colour to highlight differences between existing and proposed structures. We start to see here, if I grab a pen, that Kate in section, you can see these were stone blocks here. We see existing details and proposed details. So these were light fixtures and hooks on the walls. And we start to see here patterning, material and compositional patterning in elevation. So these are the kind of details we need to see. We also have annotations here noting major elements. We have ceiling levels and we have floor levels. And if we have Kate's work in plan, we see that you start to develop the zones and the spaces with loose furniture. Noting a legend here, which some of you missed in the last submission, and then key notes Kate has used along the side here. Leo Wang takes a different aesthetic approach to really look at these heavy volumes that he wrapped and cut through the space. So again, in plan, we see loose furniture, we see proposed in grey, existing in black. We see the development of floor finishes. We see fixtures in the kitchen here. We see door swings. We see ramp indicators. And in section, again, existing and proposed. So we see existing in elevation here in the background, existing in black, proposed in grey. And in elevation, we also see loose furniture, materiality in elevation, forms starting to develop in more detail, light shafts starting to come through in section, and a range of material and compositional details. Okay, so the new part of the assessment is the rip and tear model. What is a rip and tear model? Common terms that also describe what we're looking for are a working model, a sketch model, a process model. What this is not is a polished, finished presentation model. That can come in assessment 4. We're asking this to be your first go at that model. But a caveat here. We are designers and everything we do should be designed. So consider how you use a process mode of working to convince us of your proposal. So this model might be loose and in development, but it still needs to sell to us your scheme. So it still needs to be clear and it still needs to be evocative. This means that it's okay if it looks like this. So despite this being what some might term messy, in that, you know, the cuts are crude, there is sketching over the model, the glue marks are visible, I understand that this is about a kind of weaving in and out of the terrain of solids and voids, for example. Why are we doing this? We don't want this to be another additional thing that you have to do to tick a box. We do it because we build models in practice, and models are a fantastic way of testing, experimenting with, and developing interior space in 3-dimension. So to date in DP8, you've been working in 2-dimension, and this, you know, is a powerful mode of working, and it allows you to explore mood and spatial planning and detail. But this can really be supported by physical 3-dimensional model making as a way to test and develop your design propositions, so your spatial propositions, but also as a way to test and develop the way that you might communicate these. Again, as a little sampler for assessment for your final submission. So what do you have to actually show in this rip and tear model? We're asking just for one model of one part of the 6 key spaces. So you don't have to build a model of the whole entirety of one of your 6 key spaces, just a part. We're asking for the model to be at either 1 to 50 or 1 to 20. This is up to you and can be discussed with your tutor. What you should be thinking about in considering where this model will be taken is which area of your proposal might best be demonstrated in model. So think about how your 6 key spaces are being shown in perspective, in plan, and in section, and which space or particular part of a space might really be well expressed in physical 3-dimension. So there might be an area of the scheme that's quite hard to show in plan or section, or quite hard to capture in perspective. An intricate kind of form detail, for example, or relationships of solid and void that are quite complex in their 3-dimensional expression might be better shown in model. The second part to think this is to think about what scale 1 to 50 or 1 to 20 might best demonstrate your design intent and your key spatial strategies. So if we have a look at some examples here, if you're working in the model on the left at 1 to 50, you might be interested in showing relationships between larger volumes of spaces or larger material masses across one zone in your key area and another zone in your key area. If you're working at 1 to 20, you might be more interested in highlighting the detailed aspects of your scheme. So if you have a look at the image on the right here, a particular threshold or a particular material junction. So there's no right or wrong here. It depends on your core design ideas and spatial strategies, and you reflecting on which are the most important ones to showcase, to tell that narrative of your proposal. What should you be focusing on? So I'd really like you all to use the model to focus on demonstrating spatial relationships between extant and proposed structures. And a sectional model is a really great way to do this in interior spaces, which can be hard to capture in a closed model. If in that process you are also exploring interior and exterior environments, given the importance of landscape in this site, that's fine, but it's not essential. So how do you express these spatial relationships, both by form and through materiality? Again, depending on your design intent and your key spatial strategies, your model might focus on form, it might focus on materials, it might focus on light. It could be a combination of these three. It all depends on your design idea and the spatial expression of this idea. So if we have a look at the model on the left, this to me is a combination of both form, kind of solid and void, and materiality. So you get this very heavy form showcased in the concrete or the plaster, and then something heavy but translucent in material quality showcased in the resin. So this is about form and materiality and probably light as well. The image on the right does not tell us a lot about materiality. It tells us a lot about form and detail. So we really understand the shifting volume of the space as you move up the staircase. We understand the nature of the opening at the top of the space, the nature of the skylight at the top of the space, the nature of the staircase leading up to this opening. It doesn't tell us a lot about materials again. It does tell us a little bit about light and shade. So what we're asking you to do is to be very clear about what you are trying to say through your model. This requires you to be clear about your design intent and your spatial strategies. So have a think to yourself, what is the core message or focus of my model? And what are the tools that I will use to express this? Remember, the model is a vehicle for testing and developing spatial and material details in your proposal and communicating it. And this is a trial run for assessment 4. Again, we ask you to experiment with graphic techniques. So, how do you create a sectional model? How deep is it? Is it just a thin slice, or is it something that shows the depth of the space in a greater way? Experiment with graphic techniques for a rip and tear model. So we're not asking for a polished model, which I know is what a lot of those examples have shown. We're asking you to translate the principles of those examples into graphic techniques that are probably more evocative of these images. Remember, there's a relationship. There's a relationship between your drawings, your perspectives, your storyboard images, and your model. Model making is a really key part of what we do in industry, and it's a great means to test ideas before we see them built. So you see here Erico and Moss, so we've got a process model on the left here, and this later developed into a more resolved proposition on the right. You can clearly see the relationship between these two models and perspective drawings. Like the drawings and the perspectives, add people to your models. Again, a great way to test the scale of the space. And remember that this assessment and so these models are about you developing and expressing your interior spaces. Not so much landscape, not so much architecture. There is an intersection, but what we're really asking you to do is to flex your muscles and show that you have developed real skills in developing interior environments. Let's now go through the assessment criteria. So, like assessment 2, we have 65% marks going to design intent and interior resolution. So the difference here is that we're not talking about large-scale architectural resolution, we're talking about interior resolution. We have 30% on crafting, communication and professionalism, in drawings, in perspectives and in your rip and tear model, and then 5% on standards and codes. So design intent, and that should say actually, sorry, interior resolution. Let's just cross that out there. So what is your design intent underpinning your interior spaces? Has it been considered? Is it clear? How have you dealt with dialogue between proposed and extant structures? Is it considered? Is it clear? How have you dealt with interior spaces being responsive to the use and users that you are proposing? Has it been considered? Is it clear? How have you demonstrated real proficiency in developing the room scale proposition of your interior spaces? Have you been considered and clear in developing materials and furnishings? Have you been considered and clear in developing natural and artificial lighting? Have you been considered and clear in developing fixed and loose furniture? Have you demonstrated originality and creativity in your design decisions? So I've highlighted the elements in orange here because they're the focus of this assessment in being that they really underpin kind of core elements of interior spaces. Crafting, communication and professionalism. Have you developed graphic strategies that really communicate your design intent? Or is there a mismatch between the design idea and the graphic strategies that you've chosen? Does your presentation and all three components of it demonstrate a pre-professional level of design and crafting? The working model or the rip and tear model is a process model, but sometimes we do present process models in-house to design supervisors and to clients. So you need to consider how you can be clear and evocative in your process models. And finally, how considered have you been in integrating image, typography and layout throughout the presentation? Standards and codes are the same as Assessment 2, so our space is fully accessible to AS 1428, our stairs and ramps compliant with AS 1428, and a drawings drawn within the guides of AS 1100. This is not an exercise in ticking the boxes of the codes. The codes are there to give us structure and guidelines, but I'd encourage you to think about Rosemary KS's talk and about the human condition. So how do we make spaces that are equally joyous to experience for someone who is walking, as for someone who is in a wheelchair, as for someone who is blind, as for someone who has a pram, as for someone who is 95 years old. Think about this in every single design decision that you make. How will Assessment Day run? So we're going to do something a little bit different this time. We'll be having presentations in groups of 4, and these will be informal discussions. I'd like you to nominate these groups of 4, and within this you will have a presenter, a scribe, a timer, and then the staff member who will be the critic, and this will rotate depending on whose presentation it is. We're going to be having round robin discussions with your tutor, and each tutor will also have a guest critic. Discussion 1 will be with your tutor, and then you will go to a guest critic. You'll have 3 minutes to present your scheme and 10 minutes for feedback. So we'll use most of the 4-hour session. So discussion 1 with your tutor will be 13 minutes. Discussion 2 with a guest critic will also be 13 minutes. The room will look something like this. So we'll have 5 guest critics, and we'll have our 5 tutors, and we'll have groups of students in groups of 4, rotating between tutor and critic. If you're not seeing your tutor or a guest critic, you're free to continue on your work, to listen in on other presentations, to have a walk around the room and see what other students have done. This is intended to be a loose day. It's intended to give you the maximum amount of feedback possible before Assessment 4, to hear from your tutor and to also hear from another voice so that you really reflect on your scheme from different perspectives. Because we have guest critics, you'll be presenting to a new audience. So it's really important that you think about what you're going to say and you plan your talk. I'd be suggesting that you think of this as a bit of a pitch about your overall proposition, and then how this overall proposition has informed your interior propositions from the perspective of design intent. So what's the design idea, and the spatial expression of this in terms of interiors. So that's the end of the briefing on Assessment 3. I wish you all the best of luck and look forward to seeing you in class. Any questions that you have, please post them onto the Moodle Q&A forum. You can also ask your tutor in class, you can ask demonstrators on Mondays, and you can ask myself at any point. Come and grab me. See you all soon.